In the first half of July, after celebrating my birthday, comes the order to move to Zamość, located in the central sector of the Eastern Front. Here the Russians have launched a new large-scale offensive. We arrive at our new base of operations, flying over the northern Carpathians, Struge, and skirting Lvov. Zamość is a pleasant little town and makes a good impression on us. We are housed in old Polish barracks on the northern outskirts of the town. Our airfield is quite far from the city and is a regular field. The runway is very narrow, and one day led to an unfortunate incident. During his first landing, non-commissioned officer Dodiu's plane parachutes, and the pilot is seriously injured. He is one of my best tank snipers, and it will be a long time before we see him again. Here again, there is a lot of work for tank fighters, especially when the front line is so fluid. Tank breakthroughs are frequent. We have held Kovel, but the Soviets have bypassed it and intend to force the bug. Very little time passes, and their shock wedges appear northwest of Lvov, at Rawa Ruska and Tomaso, and capture Holm in the north. During this phase, we relocate again, this time to Milik, a small Polish town 100 kilometers northwest of Krakow. The objective of the Soviet offensive is clear. They are trying to reach the Vistula River on a relatively broad front. Our target is the approaching masses of men and military equipment trying to cross the San north of Peremyshl. Enemy opposition in the air should not be underestimated, as American fighters serving as escorts for the 4-engine bombers appear with increasing frequency. They initially depart from air bases in the Mediterranean. As we assume, they do not return to their bases after completing the mission, but land on Russian territory to refuel. They then fly again the next day for the mission and fly south to their permanent air bases after the mission is completed. During one of the sorties over the San River, flying a mission, I encounter these Mustangs. Out of nearly 300, I am flying with 15 other Stukas without any fighter escort. We are still 30 kilometers from Yaroslav, our objective today. In order not to endanger the squadron, and among all others, several crews of newcomers, I give the order to drop the bombs so that we can maneuver better during such an unequal air battle. I reluctantly give this order. So far, we have always attacked our assigned target, even in the face of overwhelming enemy superiority. We're getting rid of the bombs for the first and last time in the war. But today, I have no choice. So I bring the squadron home without loss, and we find ourselves able to make up for this failure and complete the mission the next day under much more favorable conditions. The success justifies my actions because in the evening I learned that a neighboring unit has suffered heavy losses from a huge formation of Mustangs. A few days later, while refueling, we are again taken by surprise by American planes, which immediately descend and begin attacking our planes. The defense of our airfield is not very strong, and our anti-aircraft gunners, caught by surprise, are late in opening fire on the attackers. The Americans did not take into account the anti-aircraft guns, and since their plans clearly did not include fighting a resisting enemy, they turn around and go away in search of easier prey. A phone call from the Luftwaffe headquarters. For the first time in this war, the Russians have set foot on German soil and are rushing into East Prussia from the Volkovisk area in the direction of Gumbinen. Insterburg. I want to fly to East Prussia immediately. I receive an order for transfer, and the next day I arrive in Insterburg together with all the flight personnel. Being in the divine peaceful silence of East Prussia, it is impossible to imagine that the war has already come so close, and from this quiet place we'll have to make combat sorties involving bombers and planes, tank fighters. In Insterburg itself, people had not yet realized the seriousness of the situation. The local airfield is still overloaded with facilities that are useless for such mass combat operations. It is therefore best to move to Lutzen in the Masurian Lakes region, where we find ourselves alone on a tiny airfield. Midsummer in the beautiful East Prussian countryside. Is it to become a battlefield? It is here that we realize we are fighting for our homes and our freedom. How much German blood has already been spilled on this land, and all in vain. It must not happen again. These thoughts do not leave us as we fly towards our goals. Memel or Siualiai, Suwalki or Akastoa. We are back where we started in 1941, where the invasion to the east began. Will this majestic monument in Tannenberg take on even greater symbolic significance? The planes of our squadron carry the emblem of German chivalry. Never has it meant so much to us. Fierce fighting in the area of Volkovisk. The city several times passes from hand to hand. Here holds the defense of a small German armored unit. We support it from the first to the last ray of light, repulsing for several days countless Russian attacks. Some of the T-34s are taking cover behind huge haystacks in the fields from which the crops have already been harvested. We set fire to the stacks with incendiary bullets to deny them cover, then attack the tanks. The summer is hot. We are stationed by the water and often bathe in the short half-hour intervals between sorties, a real treat. Soon the impact of these battles on the ground and our sorties begins to be felt. The initial fury of the Russian attacks is noticeably weakened. Counterattacks occur more and more frequently, and the front stabilizes again to a certain extent. But when fighting subsides in one place, you can be sure that it will flare up somewhere else. The Soviets are rushing into Lithuania, trying to outflank our armies in Estonia and Latvia. Consequently, there is always plenty of work for us in the air. The Soviets are relatively well aware of the strength of our defenses on the ground and in the air. One of the sorties gives Lieutenant Fickle a reason to celebrate his birthday again. We fly out to attack a concentration of enemy forces, and the Reds once again use their old trick of making radio transmissions on our frequencies. Personally, at that moment I can't understand what they're gibbering about. But it's obviously about us because they keep repeating the word Stuka. My linguist colleague and the ground post, which has an interpreter, tell me the whole story afterward. Here's what, roughly, is going on. The Stukas are approaching from the west. I call all Red Falcons. Immediately attack the Stukas. There are about 20 of them. In front is a single Stuka with 2 long stripes. This is in all obviousness Rudel's squadron, the same one that always disables our tanks. Calling all Red Falcons and anti-aircraft gunners, shoot down the Stuka with the long stripes. Lieutenant Marquardt is right in the air making a brief translation. Fickle says with a laugh, "If they're aiming at the lead man, you can bet they'll hit the wingman." He usually flies my wingman, and so he knows what he's saying. Ahead and below us on the road running between 2 wooded areas, the Ivans are moving with their vehicles, artillery, and other equipment. Heavy anti-aircraft fire. The Red Falcons are here. We're being attacked by aerocovers. I give the order to start the attack. Most of the planes dive on the trucks, smaller ones on the anti-aircraft batteries, maneuvering desperately. The fighters believe now that it is their time. The bursts of anti-aircraft shells are getting closer and closer to our planes. Just before entering the dive, Fickle takes a direct hit in the wing. He drops his bombs and goes in the direction we came from. His plane is engulfed in flames. We've already dropped the bombs, and we're coming out of the dive. I gain altitude to see where Fickle has gone. He lands in the center of a poorly landed area, with ditches, holes, stumps, and other obstacles. His plane skips over 2 ditches like an angry goose. It's a miracle he didn't spar. Here he and his gunner climb out of the cockpit. The situation is bad. Enemy cavalrymen, followed by several tanks, are approaching the plane from the side of the forest, quite obviously intending to capture the crew. The aerocovers are attacking us even more fiercely from above. I say, someone must land immediately. You all know I'm not allowed to do that now. I have a terrible feeling because I've been banned from flying, and it's not in my nature to disobey orders. We are still circling over the downed plane. Fickle and Barch down there, in all probability unable to imagine that anyone could land unharmed under such circumstances. The Soviets gradually come closer and still no one starts the landing. Evasive maneuvers to evade fighter attacks require the full attention of each crew. It is difficult for me to make the decision to land myself no matter what, but in this situation if I do not act immediately, my comrades will die. if they can still be saved at all. I have the best chance of doing so. I know that disobeying an order is unforgivable, but the determination to save my comrades is stronger than a sense of duty. I have forgotten the consequences of my actions, everything else. I must save them. I give the orders. 7. Attack cavalry and infantry from low altitude. 8th. Circle at medium altitude to cover me and Fickle. 9th. Go higher and tie up the fighters. If they dive, attack them from above. I fly very low over the forced landing site and pick out a patch of ground that I can use, if unlucky, to land on. Slowly I add gas. Here we are over the second ditch. Take off the throttle. A horrible jump. Then I stop. Fickle and Barch run towards us like people saving their lives. Here they are already at the airplane. The Ivan's bullets haven't hit anyone yet. They both climb into the cockpit. I give the throttle. I'm shaking with tension. Will I be able to take off? Will my plane rise into the air before it hits some obstacle on the ground and blows to pieces? There's the ditch. I lift off the ground, fly over the ditch. Wheels touch the ground again. Then the plane levels off. Slowly the tension subsides. The squadron approaches us, and we return home without loss. Rudel's wandering circus is stationed in a harvested field near the town of Wenden, close to the Latvian-Estonian border. Field Marshal Schorner kept trying to get my squadron in his sector and finally succeeded. We found ourselves on the Kurland front. No sooner had we settled on our field when the inevitable cake appeared along with a greeting from the Field Marshal. No matter where I come under his command, one of these fabulous cakes always appears, usually with a T-34 in icing sugar along with the number of tanks I have destroyed so far. Right now the cake is decorated with the number 320. The general situation here is as follows. We conducted an offensive in the area of Tukum in order to restore the broken link with the rest of the Eastern Front. The strike was carried out by an assault group under the command of Colonel Count Strachwitz and was successful. Nevertheless, the Soviets are making stubborn efforts to break through our defenses in eastern Kurland. This sector has long been a real thorn in their side. So far it has held out thanks to the bravery of our German soldiers, in spite of the enormous material superiority of the Soviets. At the moment this sector is again under unusually heavy pressure. The Field Marshal has called us to help precisely to relieve this enemy pressure. During our first sorties we see that the front line here is relatively stable. The red positions are everywhere well fortified. Their camouflage is excellent. Their anti-aircraft batteries are close to the front line, and everywhere strong enough. Enemy activity in the air is lively and does not cease for an hour. There are hordes of enemy fighters circling there and only a few of our planes, because it is so difficult to get supplies into the cauldron. Stocks of gasoline, bombs, and equipment must be available whenever they are needed and require a lot of storage space. The bread we eat here is earned by hard work, no matter in which direction we fly, east or south of the cauldron, on the Tukum front, or where the main Russian strike is directed, through Dorpat to Tallinn. In several sorties we were lucky and managed to destroy a large motorized convoy, including escort tanks, which reached Derpt. This breakthrough was stopped, and the front was completely closed by the army forces. Where did they get these incalculable masses of men and fighting equipment from? There is obviously something supernatural about it. Most of the trucks we shell are usually of American origin. Only occasionally there are small groups of Shermans moving among the tanks we run into. The Russians don't even need these American tanks because their own are better adapted to combat conditions in Russia, and they are produced in fabulous quantities. This vast amount of military equipment and supplies leaves us confused and often discouraged. We often encounter American-made airplanes, especially Aerocobras, King Cobras, and Bostons. The Americans are supplying their ally with motor vehicles in incredible quantities, but also with airplanes. Is it really in their own interest to help the Russians on this scale? We often argue about this. One day, at 3:30 in the morning, I am awakened by Lieutenant Weisbach, my intelligence officer. Field Marshal Schorner wants to speak to me urgently. For a long time I have turned off my telephone at night because I make my first sorties very early and must be well rested. So my intelligence officer, who doesn't have to fly the next morning, takes all the night calls. But for the field marshal, I'm always on. He doesn't beat around the bush. It's not his style. Can you fly out immediately? Up to 40 tanks and motorized infantry have broken through. Our frontline units were unable to stop the breakthrough and want to close the gap again this evening. But these Russians have already advanced far and need to be attacked to prevent them from expanding the breakthrough area. If they succeed in doing that, they could do a lot of damage to our rear supply lines. It's the same old story. I've been in the Fuehrer sector too long to wonder much longer. Our brothers in arms at the front have laid low and let the tanks over them, and now expect us to carry chestnuts out of the fire for them. They have left us the honor of dealing with the enemy forces in their rear, hoping that they can close the gap that very evening or in a couple of days by disarming the encircled enemy forces. Here in Kurland, this is especially important because any enemy breakthrough could lead to the disintegration of the entire front. After a brief analysis of the situation, I tell Field Marshal, in the darkness, the sortie will have no success because I need daylight to attack tanks and trucks from low altitude. I promise to take to the air at dawn with the forces of the entire 3rd Squadron and anti-tank link to attack the place on the map that you indicate to me. I will then contact you immediately and let you know what the situation looks like. According to what he told me, the Reds have penetrated the Lake District and at the moment, with all their shock armored formations are on the road running between the two lakes. Meanwhile, I instruct Lieutenant Weisbach to use the telephone to gather weather reports from all possible sources and wake us up so that we could take off in the pre-dawn twilight and appear over the target at first light. A quick phone call to the squad leaders, and it's all automatic from there. Something you've practiced hundreds of times, you can do in your sleep. The cook knows exactly when to serve coffee. The chief mechanic knows to the second when to build ground staff and start preparing for departure. All I have to do is tell the squadrons. First flight at 5:30. Early in the morning, there is a thick fog over the airfield. In view of the urgency of this mission, and hoping that visibility will be better in the target area, we take off. At low altitude, we are heading southeast. Fortunately, the terrain below is flat as a board. Otherwise, the flight would be impossible. Visibility is just over 400 meters, especially when it's not quite light yet. We have been flying for about half an hour when the fog descends to the ground because we are approaching the Lake District. Because of the difficulty of flying at an altitude of 50 to 60 meters, I give the order to regroup. For safety reasons, we line up in a single row. Neighboring planes move in the ground layer of fog and from time to time disappear from sight. Under these weather conditions, we will not be able to attack successfully. If we have to drop bombs, because of the low altitude, the flying debris may damage our own vehicles. Just staying in the target area didn't help anyone. I'm glad when the last of us lands safely. I inform Field Marshal Fuehrer of everything, and he tells me that he has received the same weather reports from the front line. Finally, close to 9 o'clock in the morning, the layer of fog over the airfield spreads a little and rises to a height of 400 meters. I fly out with the anti-tank link, accompanied by the 7th link, which should bomb targets. Under the very layer of fog, we again go to the southeast. But the farther we fly in this direction, the lower edge falls. Soon we are again forced to descend to a height of 50 meters. Visibility is extremely poor. There are almost no landmarks on the terrain, and so I fly by compass. The lake area begins, and the weather remains nasty. I am approaching from the northeast, to the point that Field Marshal gave me as the location of the shock wedges. I make a slight detour to the west and fly past the target, so that after the approach to the target I would continue to fly in a straight line toward home, a much-needed precaution in this weather. If the enemy is as strong as has been described to us, he is most likely protected by adequate anti-aircraft fire. We cannot cautiously approach the objective under cover of hills or trees, because we are entering the attack over water, Accordingly, in selecting tactics, anti-aircraft fire must be taken into consideration. Staying out of sight of anti-aircraft gunners, then coming out of the clouds and hiding in them is not recommended for the entire formation because of the danger of collision so close to the ground. Although it is possible for a single aircraft, the pilots will have to pay attention solely to the flight itself and will not be able to concentrate enough on their task. We are flying low over the water, coming in from the south. The weather is overcast. I can't distinguish anything further than 700 to 800 meters. Now directly ahead I see a dark moving mass. A road, tanks, trucks, Russians. I immediately shout, "Attack!" Immediately, almost at point-blank range, the defense opens fire directly at my car. Twin and quad counter machine guns, automatic rifles are firing. Everything is brightly lit by flashes. I'm flying at a height of 30 meters and ran into the middle of a hornet's nest. Isn't it time to get out of here? Other planes fan out on either side of me, and the defenses aren't paying as much attention to them. I spin and toss the car from side to side, performing the craziest defensive maneuvers to avoid being hit. I shoot without aiming because trying to level the car for a more accurate aim would mean certain death. When I reach the tanks and vehicles, I gain a little altitude and fly right over them. I wait every second for a hit. This is all going to end badly. My head is as hot as the metal screeching past. A few seconds later, there is a loud bang. Gatterman yells, "The engine's on fire." A hit to the engine. I can see that the engine is not giving the right revs. Flames are licking the cockpit. "Ernest, let's jump. I'll gain a little altitude and fly as far as I can to get out of the way of the Russians. I saw our guys not far away. I try to climb higher. I have no idea of our altitude. Dark oil on the cockpit glazing. I can't see anything else and drop the lantern to see something, but that doesn't help either. Flames cover everything around me. "Ernest, let's jump right now." The engine stutters and crackles, stops, runs again, stops, runs. Our airplane will become our crematorium in that meadow over there. "We've got to jump." "We can't," shouts Gatterman. "It's only 30 meters high." He can see better from behind. He too has dropped his flashlight, cutting the intercom wire. We can no longer speak to each other. His last words, "We're over the forest." I pull on the handle as hard as I can, but the plane refuses to climb up. Gatterman says we're flying too low to parachute. Can we land? Probably yes, even though I can't see anything. For that, the engine must be running, albeit erratically. I'm slowly taking off the throttle. When I feel the airplane begin to slump, I cast my eyes around. I can see the ground whizzing by. We are now only 6 or 7 meters high. I tense my muscles in case of impact. Suddenly, we touch the ground, and I turn off the ignition. The engine stops. Maybe we're finished. Then something rumbles, and I don't remember anything else. I feel something around me, so I'm still alive. I try to remember. I am lying on the ground. I want to get up, but I can't. I am pinned to the ground, pain in my leg and head. Then it comes to me that Gatterman must be somewhere. I call out to him, "Ernest, where are you?" I can't get up. Wait a little while. Maybe it will work out. It hurts a lot. A little time passes before he, limping, comes over to me and tries to pull me out of the wreckage. I realize now why I'm in so much pain. A long piece of metal from the tail of the plane has pierced my lower thigh, and the entire tailplane is lying right on top of me, so I can't move. Where are the burning pieces? The first thing Gatterman does is pull a piece of metal out of my leg. Then he extracts me from under the tail debris. He has to strain all his strength to lift them. I ask, "Do you think the Russians are here yet?" Hard to say. We are surrounded by woods and brush. As soon as I get to my feet, I look around at the scene of the crash. About 30 meters away from us lies the engine. It's still on fire. 10 meters away lies the wings. One of them is also smoking. Right in front of me, at a decent distance, lies a part of the fuselage with the seat of the flight gunner, in which Gatterman was jammed. That's why his voice was heard from the front when I called out to him. It usually comes from behind, because he's sitting behind me. We dress our wounds and try to figure out why we're still alive and in relative safety, because without proper dressing I can't expect to be saved. Too much blood has been lost. Our fall from a 30-meter height went in what seems to have been the following sequence. The main impact was softened by the trees at the edge of the forest. Then the plane hit a strip of sandy soil where it broke apart, and its various parts flew apart, as I have already described. Both of us were not buckled in as we were preparing to parachute. I still can't understand why I didn't hit my head on the dashboard. I was lying far away from the remains of the pilot's seat. I must have been thrown here along with the tail. Yeah, you're not born beautiful. You're born happy. Suddenly a crackling sound is heard in the bushes. Someone is making his way through the undergrowth. We look in the direction of the sound with bated breath, then exhale with relief. We recognize the German uniforms. They heard the rumble of a fall from the road, and before that, distant gunfire and a burning German airplane. They rush us. There is no one behind us, only hordes of Ivans. One of them adds with a chuckle, but I think you've spotted the Ivans yourself, and points with his eyes to the smoking wreckage of the airplane. We climb into the truck they were riding in and head northwest. In the afternoon, we arrive at the squadron's location. No one saw our crash because everyone was busy at that moment. The first 4 hours of our absence did not cause much concern, since I, as a result of enemy action, was often forced to land my plucky U-87 on its belly not far from the front line, and then report my whereabouts by telephone. Nevertheless, as more than 4 hours passed, people's faces darkened and faith in my proverbial infallible guardian angel began to wane. I got through to the field marshal. He was more pleased than anyone that I had returned from the other side of the world, and need hardly be told that he had warned me of the imminent arrival of another birthday cake. The sky is bright blue. The last signs of fog have disappeared. I report to the field marshal that we are flying out again. I am particularly ill-disposed against our Soviet friends. It's them, or me. That's the law of war. This time it wasn't me. Hence, it was their turn. The regiment sent its medic to the Storch. He bandages my wounds and announces that I have received a concussion. Gatterman has broken 3 ribs. I can't say I feel great, but my determination to fly outweighs all other considerations. I'm briefing the crews, assigning them targets. We will attack the anti-aircraft guns with all bomber planes, and when they are neutralized, we will destroy trucks and tanks during low-altitude attacks. My squadron quickly takes to the air and heads southeast. We are flying at an altitude of 2,200 meters, so we will be able to come in from the side of the sun. The anti-aircraft gunners will have a hard time seeing us, and we can more accurately drop bombs on their guns if they glint in the sun. There they are, still in the same place as before. Apparently, they're not going to move on until reinforcements arrive. Some of the anti-aircraft guns are mounted on trucks. The rest are placed in circular fortifications around the vehicles. Once the fireworks begin, I quickly memorize the targets and then follow my own plan of attack, starting with the anti-aircraft guns. I find a special satisfaction in this, as I owe them for the fact that a few hours ago my life hung in the balance. We, in anti-tank planes, fly through the smoke and dust clouds created by bomb explosions and attack the T-34s. We have to be careful at all times not to be near an exploding bomb. Anti-aircraft guns are soon suppressed. One tank after another explodes. The trucks catch fire. They never make it to Germany. This armored wedge has definitely lost its impetuousness. We return home with the feeling that we have done our best. In the evening, the field marshal calls us again and tells us that our comrades on the ground have carried out a successful counterattack. The breach has been closed and the encircled enemy destroyed. He thanks us on behalf of the command for our support. Tomorrow morning, I will have to relay his message to the entire squadron. Our greatest reward is to hear from our comrades in arms that their cooperation with us proved indispensable and contributed to their success. ******. In Latvia, we received disturbing rumors that the Soviets have invaded Romania. We are immediately transferred to Buzău, north of Bucharest. Our route from East Prussia is via Krakow and Debrecen, a marvelous flight across Eastern Europe in the Indian summer sunshine. The flight is made by the 3rd Squadron and regimental headquarters. The 2nd Squadron is in the Warsaw area, and the 1st Squadron is already in Romania. At Debrecen, a lot of time is spent refueling, and it is too late to fly further into Romania. We have to cross the Carpathians, and I am not going to lose crews during the flight. So we stay overnight in Debrecen, and in the evening I suggest we all go for a swim. There are marvelous baths in the town with water from warm healing springs. We find here, to the delight and pleasure of my companions, women of all ages sitting phlegmatically in the water with their handbags, books, and embroidery. Their water procedures are accompanied by endless female gossip. This is what they do for most of the day. To the veterans of the Russian company, the sight of these women in bathing costumes presents a very outlandish spectacle. The next morning we fly to Klausenburg, a beautiful old town where the Transylvanian Germans lived centuries ago, which is why the locals speak German. We are in a big hurry and stop here only for refueling. At this time, an American spy plane appears at an altitude of 7,000 meters. This means that the visit of American bombers will not have to wait too long. The flight over the Carpathians to Buzău leaves an unforgettable impression, as well as any flight over a beautiful mountain landscape in perfect weather. A town appears ahead. The local airfield used to be used as an intermediate stop on the way to the front far to the north. Now it is an operating base almost at the very front. What happened to the stable front line along the Iasi-Targul-Frumos line and on to Huză? The airfield is in the middle of open terrain, and it is difficult to camouflage our planes. Very close is Ploiești, the oil heart of Romania. It is incessantly attacked by American bombers under very strong fighter protection. After the bombing, the fighters may turn their attention to us as well, if only they think we are worth it. The number of American fighters that are sent to escort the bombers during each sortie is greater than the total number of German fighters on the entire front. When I come in for a landing, I see that all the roads leading to the airfield are jammed with endless streams of Romanian soldiers striving southward, in places columns frozen in traffic jams. Among them, heavy artillery of all calibers. But there are no German units here. I find myself witnessing the final act of tragedy. Whole sectors on the front line have been abandoned by Romanian units, which have ceased to offer any resistance and are now retreating all along the front. The Soviets are pursuing them on their heels. Where the Romanians are retreating, the German soldiers are fighting to the last man. So they will be cut off and taken prisoner. They think that our Romanian allies will never allow the Soviets to invade Romania without a fight and will abandon their people to their fate. They simply refuse to believe it. After landing, our planes immediately begin to prepare for departure. I report the arrival to the regimental headquarters. They are happy that we are back and will fight with them. They believe that we will have a lot to do. Russian tanks are already in Fuehrer. Their goal is to quickly capture Bucharest and Ploiești. Further north, German troops from Army Group South are still fighting. Meanwhile, our planes are ready to take off, and we immediately take off, gain altitude, and go over the main road going north to Fuehrer. 10 kilometers south of this town, we see giant dust clouds. Yes, those are Russian tanks. We attack. They move off the road and scatter across the fields. But that doesn't save them. We shoot some of them, then return to replenish ammunition and continue our fight with the same column. Everywhere you look there are masses of men and military equipment, mostly Mongols. Are their human reserves so inexhaustible? We get fresh, clear evidence that the productive capacity of the USSR was greatly underestimated by everyone, and no one knows the true state of affairs. Masses of tanks, again and again in unimaginable quantities, are the most convincing proof of this. Many vehicles of American manufacture. One hour attack follows another, from sunrise to sunset, as it has been all these years. One of the last days of August. I take off early in the morning to go to the area north of us where the Reds have broken through, and climb to an altitude of 50 meters above the airfield. Suddenly our anti-aircraft guns open fire. They are manned by Romanian squads, who are supposed to defend our airfield from attacks by Russian and American planes. I look over to where the shells are exploding and scour the sky for enemy bombers. Did the Americans really get up so early this morning? I, along with the other planes, make a U-turn over the runway to wait under protection as events unfold further. But the shells are flying lower, and some are bursting in unpleasant proximity to my plane. I look down at the firing batteries and see that the barrels of the anti-aircraft guns are turning to follow our maneuvers. One of the shells bursts very close. There are no enemy planes in sight. There is no doubt anymore. These anti-aircraft guns are firing at our planes. I can't explain it in any way, but the fact remains. We are flying north against the advancing Soviets, who are tearing southward in large forces from the Husi-Barlet-Foscari area. During our return to the airfield, I am prepared for more absurd antics by the Romanian anti-aircraft gunners, ground control having already informed me on the way back that the guns were aimed precisely at me. As of today, the Romanians are at war with us. We immediately descend to low altitude and land one at a time. The individual Romanian guns open fire on us again, but as before, with no success. I immediately head for the telephone and connect with Romanian General Ionescu. He commands the entire Romanian Air Force, as well as the anti-aircraft batteries, and I know him well personally from Husi. He has several German decorations. I tell him that the unfriendly attention this morning was directed to me and my squadron, and ask him if this is true. He does not deny it, and says that his anti-aircraft gunners saw a German fighter shoot down a Romanian liaison plane, and that accordingly they are greatly enraged and fire at all German planes that come within their sight. He has not yet once mentioned the state of war existing between Germany and Russia. I reply to his complaints that I have not the slightest intention of listening to all this nonsense, and that I was about to make a new combat sortie against the Russians north of Randikal Sarat. However, now I, with the help of my Stukas, intend first to bomb and machine gun all anti-aircraft batteries around our airfield to eliminate any interference with our sorties. Then, with the help of another squadron, we will attack his headquarters. I know exactly where it is. For God's sake, don't do that. We have always been the best of friends, and I cannot be held responsible for the actions of our government. I make you an offer. Neither we nor you will do anything about it, and pay no attention to the declaration of war as if it did not exist. I give you my personal guarantees that as long as I remain in command, not a single shot will be fired at your Stukas. He swears by our old friendship with him in particular, and by his warm feelings for us Germans in general. After this separate peace has been declared between us, I have no further cause for complaint. It is a curious situation. I am here alone with my flying staff on this airfield in a country which is at war with us. 2 Romanian divisions with all their equipment, including heavy artillery, have surrounded our airfield. Who will prevent them from liquidating us immediately? During the night hours we do not feel very cozy. During the day we are strong again. Even the 2 divisions are not very willing to be aggressive towards my Stukas when they are so heavily concentrated and in the open. Our supply of bombs and fuel at the airfield is running low, and no new supplies are coming to us as Romania can no longer be held. Our only chance is to move to the other side of the Carpathians and try to form a new front here from the remnants of those of our armies that have managed to break through from Romania, and any other units we can scrape together from the reserves. It is quite clear that our heavy artillery will never be able to overcome the Carpathians and will have to be abandoned in Romania. If only the bulk of our brave army could get out of this diabolical cauldron of treason, for which the Romanian government is to be blamed. Weapons can be replaced, difficult as it may be, but men can never be replaced. Our ground staff is getting ready to hit the road leading over the Betrayal Pass. We are using the last drops of fuel attacking the Russian wedges that are coming closer and closer to Betrayal. Often we make sorties deep into the Russian positions to relieve the German troops still engaged in fierce fighting here. What a sad sight, enough to drive anyone to despair, to see these veterans of the Russian company, surrounded by the enemy, thrashing against the approaching wall of a numerically superior enemy until they have nothing to fight with but their personal weapons. The artillery has long since fired all the shells. Soon they will not even have rifle or revolver cartridges left. The only way to drag out their resistance is to attack and attack again. Now our supplies at the airfield are finally depleted, and we are flying west over the Carpathian Mountains to our new base of operations at Tisza region in Hungary. In this town, almost everyone speaks German. It is the citadel of the Transylvanian Germans. There's a German church and a German school over there. And when you walk through the town, you don't even think about the fact that you're not in Germany. The city is picturesquely spread between chains of hills and small mountains. In the neighborhood there are many forests. Our airfield is on high ground and surrounded by forests, and we are stationed in the town itself and in the neighboring purely German villages to the north and northeast of it. Our operations at the moment are directed against the enemy tearing from the east across the Carpathians. There are many excellent defensive positions here, but we do not have sufficient forces to hold them, as all heavy artillery has been lost in Romania. Even the most favorable terrain cannot be defended against the most modern weapons by heroism alone. We make attacks from low altitudes on mountain passes and the roads leading to them. I have experience of flying in the Caucasus Mountains, but here the valleys are very narrow, especially in the lower part, and before you could turn around, you have to climb to a considerable height. The roads on the passes are winding, and large sections of them run along notches cut into the rocky mountain slopes. Since cars and tanks are usually protected by rocks, you have to be devilishly careful not to crash into them here and there. If another group of planes flies over in the same area and at the same time, perhaps coming in on target from the other side of the valley, and belatedly sees us through the haze, then for a split second death grasps the control stick with a bony hand when one group meets another flying towards it. This is an even greater danger than the anti-aircraft guns, which must by no means be discounted. Some of them are stationed on mountain slopes, to the right and left of the roads through the passes. The enemy has realized that leaving anti-aircraft guns as part of convoys on the road is relatively ineffective when we, for example, attack targets below from behind a group of rocks. There are few fighters so far. Are the Russians taking so long to relocate to Romanian airfields? I doubt it, because they have no supply problems, and the existing airfields at Buzău, Roman, Tecuci, Bacău, and Silistria are perfectly located and quite adequate for the battle. Presumably the Ivans are not very fond of flying in the mountains. They are especially wary of flying at low altitude in the valleys because of the possibility of unexpectedly hitting a dead end, the way out of which is blocked by sharply rising mountains. I had exactly the same feeling 2 years ago when we were flying over passes and valleys in the Caucasus Mountains. At this time, I receive orders to take command of the regiment and surrender my 3rd Squadron. As my successor, the name of Oberleutnant Law, he had served with distinction in the squadron since Greece. After the first phase of the Russian company, he was assigned to staff work and has now returned to the front again. As far as my own flying is concerned, this change does not affect me in any way. I have available for flying all the types of airplanes in service with the regiment and can fly with one unit or another at any time. One day in early September, I take off early in the morning with my 3rd Squadron. The 2nd Squadron accompanies us as an escort. I myself, together with a squadron of anti-tank planes, are engaged in hunting tanks in the area of the Oitatsko Pass. The situation there does not seem particularly pleasant. I decide, therefore, immediately after my return to take to the air in the FV-190. Meanwhile, the other pilots' airplanes are being serviced before the next flight. Lieutenant Hofmeister is ready for the flight and will accompany me as a scout. We return to Oitatsu, make a few attacks from low altitude, and reconnoiter the state of affairs on all Carpathian passes and altitudes, from which we get a general picture of the state of affairs in our sector. I am returning, literally without a drop of gasoline and without a single cartridge, to our flying field when I see 40 silver planes coming toward me at the same altitude. We're passing very close to each other. There's no more hiding. They're American Mustangs. I say to Hofmeister, land now. I release the landing gear, flaps, and go down before the Mustangs can turn and attack. Gliding toward the ground takes a lot of nerve, because it's that moment when your airplane is completely defenseless, and there's nothing you can do but wait patiently for it to stop. I'm still rolling on the ground when I look back and see the Mustangs launching an attack, and one of them coming right at my plane. I hastily flip the lantern off. I'm still going about 50 kilometers per hour, climb out on the wing and throw myself to the ground just seconds before the Mustang's guns start barking. My airplane, which has rolled away on its own already quite far away, catches fire after the first attack. I'm pleased I was able to get out of it in time. We have no anti-aircraft guns at our airfield because no one expected or was prepared for our retreat to the Hungarian airfields. Our enemies, who have unlimited resources, can place anti-aircraft batteries on every corner. We, unfortunately, cannot afford it. The Mustangs are scattered over the entire airfield and are quietly engaged in target practice as in peacetime. My squadron, which should have been refueled and supplied with ammunition, is still on the ground. Several of the transport planes that delivered ammunition, fuel, and bombs to us are standing in the open. Aircraft that are airworthy are in makeshift hangars in the woods and are difficult to get into. But repairable planes and transports with bombs and fuel are blowing up, the guns of 40 Mustangs rumbling without respite, turning everything the pilots see into flames and debris. I am overcome with helpless rage, having to look at it all and not being able to respond. Under the entire airfield burning airplanes, above them rise clouds of black smoke. In this turmoil, one would think that the end of the world has come. As absurd as it sounds, I try to sleep for a moment. By the time I wake up, it will all be over. If that guy who keeps circling above me can hit me, I'll have an easier time accepting it if I fall asleep. After the Mustang pilot set my plane on fire during the first attack, he must have noticed me lying in the field. Perhaps he actually saw me jump off the wing. Either way, he comes back again and tries to hit me with cannons and machine guns. Apparently he can't see me clearly through the scope. He must not be able to believe he hasn't hit me yet, because after coming in once or twice, he comes roaring over me, drops to a height of a few meters, and looks at me. I lie on my stomach without moving, only turning my head slightly to glare at him from under half-lidded eyelids. Every time he approaches me from the front, sand from bullet fountains falls on me. Will he hit me next time? You can't run. They shoot at anything that moves. And so it goes on, ad infinitum. Finally he, as I am quite sure, runs out of ammunition. Passing over me once more, he flies away. His colleagues have also used up their ammunition. Very cleverly, I must admit. They line up over the airfield and fly away. Our airfield is a terrible sight, particularly at first glance. The first thing I look for is Lieutenant Hofmeister. His plane is lying on the edge of the airfield. He must have failed to land quickly and been caught while landing. He is wounded. One leg will have to be amputated. There are airplanes burning and exploding on the airfield, fortunately only a few combat-ready machines among them, which were well camouflaged and were not such an easy target. As I visit each unit in the woods, I am told that during the attack the ground personnel, as they were ordered to do, took continuous small arms fire. 4 Mustangs were shot down. Considering we had no anti-aircraft guns, this is particularly encouraging. So the Mustangs didn't get their safe target practice firing. The anti-aircraft guns arrive in a few days, and it's unlikely that the same successful raids will ever happen again. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. In our sector, we often encounter German planes piloted by Romanians, whom we ourselves have supplied with them. They are now wearing Romanian identification marks and flying on the Russian side. The Romanian base of operations is not very far from ours, so we are conducting 2 low-altitude attacks on their airfields near Karlsberg, Kronstadt, and Hermannstadt. Evil tongues suggest that we are trying to imitate the Mustangs, who did the same thing. We destroyed more than 150 airplanes on the ground, some of them in the air. They are mostly training and liaison planes, but in this case they are also used by the Romanian Air Force, even if for training. The success of these attacks depends very much on the strength of the enemy defenses. *****. The fighting in Romania has come to an end. Soviet flooding has inundated the entire country, and now they are trying to find passages into Hungary. Russian columns, one after another, are marching over the Rotherterm Pass toward Hermannstadt. Sorties against these are particularly difficult because their armies are very heavily defended against air attack. During one of the flights over the northern slopes of the pass, a 40mm anti-aircraft shell blows off my lantern. Fortunately, none of the shrapnel hits me. That same evening, my intelligence officer tells me that he hears propaganda broadcasts in German on the radio almost every day. These are stories of German soldier atrocities and incitement to guerrilla warfare. The program always begins with the words, "Kronstadt speaking." After talking to the group, we schedule the first attack on the radio station for tomorrow, so we can deal with these provocateurs. At dawn, we take off in the direction of Kronstadt, an old settlement of Transylvanian Saxons. Straight ahead, the town shows up in the morning mist. We don't have to fly over it. The transmitting station with its 2 tall masts stands on the main road 7 kilometers to the northeast. Between the giant masts is a small building, the nerve center of the entire transmitting station. As I fly closer and am about to dive, I see a car pulling out of the patio of this building. If I were sure that its occupants were the ones who were inciting the guerrillas to stab us in the back, I could easily cover them during the attack. The car disappears into the woods, and the passengers watch our radio attack from afar. You have to be very careful not to dive too low during the attack, because the masts are connected to each other with many cables, which are easy to get caught on. A small building is right in the center of my sight. I press the button, get out of dive, and circle around the masts, waiting to see the result while my squadron is back in formation. Coincidentally, one of my little 10 kilograms bombs hit the very top of a mast, which snapped and bent at right angles. There was nothing left of the radio building. The bombs had done their job. Now they would not be able to broadcast their evil propaganda from here for a long time. With this comforting thought, we return to the base. The increasing pressure on the Carpathian passes shows more and more clearly the extent of the damage to our military strength caused by the Romanian fiasco. The Soviets have advanced far beyond Hermannstadt. They are almost at Torrenberg and are trying to capture Klausenberg. Most of the troops in this sector are Hungarian, mostly parts of the 1st and 2nd Armored Divisions. There are practically no German reserves to form a backbone of resistance in this important sector. This Soviet offensive jeopardizes the German forces holding the Carpathians farther north. They have to abandon their positions on the passes with serious consequences because the Carpathians, being a natural fortress, are the key to the Hungarian plains, which will be very difficult to hold with our diminished forces. For the last few weeks, it has been easy for the Soviets to do their job because they have been advancing on Allied Romania, in which serious German resistance could not be organized. Our motto, away from Romania, the next stop is the Carpathians. But Romania has a long border, and this means that our poorly defended front will have to stretch even further. We return for a few days to our old airfield west of Soksik region, from where we make almost daily sorties to the Torrenberg area. For the first time in God knows how long, the Iron Gustavs go into action. During each sortie, we stay in the target area as long as our fuel supply allows us, always hoping to encounter the enemy. The 3rd Squadron is engaged in bombing. It is escorted by the 2nd Squadron, the headquarters wing, and myself in an FV-190. During this phase, we managed to shoot down a large number of Russian attack aircraft and fighters, especially the commander of the 2nd Squadron, Oberleutnant Kennel, who was awarded the Oak Leaves, succeeds in the hunt. It is not a matter for dive bombers to shoot down enemy planes, but during the present crisis it seems to me very important to our fighting comrades on the ground that we can successfully defeat the enemy aircraft. Therefore, our anti-tank snipers are also engaging aircraft and achieving excellent results. These operations show us old U-87 pilots that it is better to be a hound than a hare. Nevertheless, we are still loyal to our old machines. In September 1944, the battle for the plains of Hungary becomes a reality. At this point, the news reaches me that I have been promoted to the rank of lieutenant colonel. The headquarters link and ground staff are briefly stationed at Tasnet, south of Tokaj. The 1st and 2nd Squadrons and myself are southeast of Tasnet. The 3rd Squadron is moving to the Miskolc area, where their sorties are hampered by a poor airfield, all the surrounding terrain, including the roads leading to the airfield. Heavy rains have turned into swamps. We are standing here for a short time, only to assist our troops in the fighting going on in the Grossvardin-Segel-Debrecen area. The Russian hordes are moving eastward, almost exclusively at night. During the day they remain in place, well camouflaged in forests, the side roads, in cornfields or in villages. Bombing and air attacks become less important than reconnaissance, since the target must be identified before serious damage becomes possible. The German front is not a unified whole. It is for the most part isolated battle groups, hastily created by the amalgamation of units that either fought their way out of Romania or were previously cantoned in Hungary. These units are a motley mix of all branches of the military. At key points are the shock troops, infantry regiments with great traditions, SS units, all our old acquaintances and friends with whom we shared all the difficulties of the hard years in Russia. They love and appreciate our Stukas, and we feel the same way about them. If we know that one of these units is taking up its position directly below us, we can be sure that there will be no unpleasant surprises. We know most of their airborne officers personally, or at least by voice. They point out to us every pockets of resistance, no matter how small, and then we attack it with everything we have. Ground troops attack themselves with lightning speed and sweep everything away. But the numerical superiority of the enemy is so overwhelming that the greatest local successes are but a drop in the ocean. The Russians advance on the left and right of these skirmishes, and we do not have enough soldiers to hold them off, and a new breakthrough follows, the result of which is that even those troops who hold a strong defense are forced to retreat before their escape routes are cut. This happens time after time until we find ourselves once more on the Tisza, which must be held as a new line of defense. The river is narrow and does not present a serious obstacle in modern warfare. At Shagiv the Russians very soon seize a strong bridgehead, which we cannot destroy, and from it the enemy strikes rapidly to the northwest, in the direction of Kecskemét. My regiment is pulled back. We stand at Farmos, west of Szolnok, on the Szolnok-Budapest railroad line. Our airfield is frequently visited by 4-engine American bombers, who had previously concentrated their attention on the railroad bridge at Szolnok. We don't complain about our rations here, since Neerman has been given permission to hunt, and the neighborhood is teeming with hares. Every day he returns with a big sack. Fridolin is already sickened by the mere sight of hares. Sometimes there is a sharp chill in the air. Winter is coming. Walking around the neighborhood of Farmos in the evening, I succumb to the charm of the valleys to a degree I never thought possible for a mountain man like me. We fly mostly in the vicinity of the Tisza on either side, for on the west bank, the Soviets have succeeded in establishing bridgeheads in several places. Our objectives, as in the past, are concentrations of equipment on the banks of the river and on the roads leading to the bridgeheads, in addition to the constantly rebuilt bridges and crossings, which are organized by very primitive methods. Rafts, old sailing vessels, fishing boats, and pleasure boats all ply the narrow Tisza. Ivan wastes no time in assembling this heterogeneous flotilla. The busiest crossings are between Sieged and Szolnok. Later they appear to the north as well. The establishment of many bridgeheads is always a warning that the Soviets are building up the reserves needed for a fresh offensive. Our own successful offensive is underway in the Zolnok-Mezőter-Kizulis-Turku area, the purpose of which is to upset their preparations. We are flying incessantly in support of our attacks. The new Russian offensive on the Tis is delayed and weakened by this break in communications, at least in the northern sector, but they find themselves able to continue to expand the large bridgehead at Siege and connect it with smaller bridgeheads to the north. At the end of October, an offensive is launched across this entire sector, first followed by a strike to the northwest and north toward Kecskemét. Its purpose is clear: to cause the collapse of our line of defense on the Tis and rush forward across the plains to Budapest and the Danube. Ivan is very active in the air. It turns out that he occupied a number of airfields in the vicinity of Debrecen, and we are again engaged in battle with a numerically superior enemy. We are weakened by the loss of a number of airplanes shot down by anti-aircraft guns, as well as by poorly received supplies and new resupply, which leaves much to be desired. The Soviets cannot take credit for our predicament. They can only thank their Western allies who have seriously disrupted our communications with 4-engine bomber attacks on cities and railroad stations. The patrolling of railroad lines and roads by American fighter bombers completes the rest. Because of the shortage of men and equipment, we lack the means to protect our transportation highways. With the few remaining airplanes of my regiment, including anti-tank planes, I often fly combat sorties southeast of Kecskemét. The number of combat-ready airplanes is so badly reduced, for reasons I have already mentioned, that one day I fly out alone, accompanied by 4 FV-190s to attack enemy tanks in the area. As I approach the target, I can hardly believe my eyes. At a great distance, north of Kecskemét on the road-moving tanks, it's the Russians. Above them, like a bunch of grapes, hangs a thick umbrella of Soviet fighters, covering this strike group. One of the officers accompanying me knows Russian and immediately translates to me everything he can make out. The Soviets are again using our frequency for their negotiations. They are shouting at each other and making such a terrible noise that it would be a miracle if any of them could understand what is being said to them. My translator in 190 can make out something like this: calling all Red Falcons, a single Stuka with 2 long stripes is going to attack our tanks. We are sure it is the same cheeky Nazi who is shooting our tanks. There are several Fokkers with him. Attack this Stuka, not the Fokkers. He must be shot down by all means. During all this commotion, I had long since dropped to the ground and made the attack. 1 tank on fire. 2 FV-190s are hovering over me trying to distract a few La-5s. The other 2 are stuck to me, maneuvering with me. They are not going to leave me alone, which is bound to happen if they get into an air battle with the Ivans. 20 or 30 La-5s and Yak-9s are now turning their attention to us. Presumably the air guide who is directing the fighters' actions is somewhere very close to the tanks, because he is yelling like an uncut man. Forward, forward, shoot that bastard down. Can't you see that 1 tank is already on fire? To me, this is the most obvious confirmation of victory. Every time one of them attacks, I make a sharp U-turn at the very moment he is heading towards me. His speed doesn't allow him to follow my maneuvers, and it knocks his aim off. I then turn around and come in behind him, even though he is quite far away from me. I'm sorry to waste my anti-tank shells. I fire my 37mm guns at him. Of course, it would be better to use them later against other tanks. But even if I miss now, the guy who was meant to get my shells for not watching his tail will get a shock when he sees those fireballs flash by right next to him. Once again, one of the ones I'd fired on yells out, "Look around. Be careful, can't you see? A Nazi is shooting at you." He yells like he's already been shot down. The other pilot, probably the commander of this unit, says, "We have to attack him simultaneously from different directions. Assemble over the village I'm heading to now. We'll discuss what we can do here." Meanwhile, I attack the other tank. So far, they have made no attempt to hide, confident that they are safely protected by their fighters. Once again, one tank bursts into flames. The Red Falcons are circling over the village and yelling terribly. They all want a say in how best to shoot down my Ju-87. The aerial gunner on the ground is furious. He threatens. He asks if they see that 4 tanks are already burning. Here they come back again and actually attack from different directions. I'm glad that hitting the 5th tank used up my last shell, because if this game had gone on, it would have been hard to hope for a happy ending. All this time sweat is streaming down me. Although the weather is very cold, excitement warms me better than any fur jacket. The same is true of my escort. Lieutenants Berman and Kinader are less afraid of being shot down themselves than of failing in their duty to protect me. Yet it is even more likely that the Ivans can say the same of themselves. If they could not shoot down the Stuka with the stripes as they were ordered to do, they could at least take on the Fokkers. We head for home. The Ivans follow us for a while, then turn back. For a while longer we hear the gasps of the ground aviation officer and the Red Falcons, who apologize. It happens that there is nothing in the path of the Russian advance, but isolated units hastily sent to the area of the breakthrough. These often consist of anti-aircraft gunners, airfield maintenance personnel, and rear army services. We are short of men and equipment, the same old story, over and over again. Individual bravery, individual actions can delay but cannot completely stop the advance of colossal masses of men and enemy equipment. The few strike units we have cannot keep up everywhere at the same time. In spite of everything, our comrades on the ground are fighting with unfathomable bravery. The front along the Tisza can no longer be held. The next line of defense must be the Danube. I am alarmed by the Soviet strike in the extreme south through Fundkirchen towards Kaposhwar. If it proves successful, this new position will again be in danger. Very little time passes and my fears are confirmed. One of our last days at Farmos, we have just received a report that a Russian armored column has broken through in the direction of the Matra Mountains and reached the outskirts of Jongisa. Our units, who have been outflanked, are anxious to recover the situation and close the gap. The weather has deteriorated and is becoming an additional test for us, because the whole terrain is heavily hilly and the cloud cover lies very low. We leave Budapest to the right and soon see the Matra Mountains ahead, and the Jong is even farther ahead. To the south fires are burning. Obviously something is going on there. I can see tanks coming down the road, and clearly not German tanks. As I turn in their direction to get a general idea of the enemy forces, I am met by heavy anti-aircraft fire. We are circling at low altitude over the head of the tank column. Ahead of the T-34s and IS comes a new type of tank that I have never seen before, but it is not an American machine either. I destroy this tank first, and then switch to the others. Soon 5 tanks are on fire, but I am out of ammunition. The anti-tank link did a good job, and the day started badly for Ivan. We regroup and move home. On the way we are intercepted by late-appearing Soviet Yak-9 fighters, but they do us no harm. We are already behind our positions, and the base is only 10 minutes away when it suddenly occurs to me. What words will I use to describe the first tank hit in my report? Will I get a clear enough picture from which I can identify the type of this tank? It is very important that our general staff knows what types of tanks appear on certain parts of the front. Such information indicates what new weapons began to be produced or came from other countries. I must know what model this tank was. So I order the commander of the 3rd Squadron to lead the planes home, and I turn around and fly back. I turn down the throttle a little and at a height of 3 to 4 meters fly around several times the mysterious steel monster, examining it from the closest distance. At its side stands an IS, which in all likelihood came up from somewhere in the tail of the column to find out what's going on. The strange tank is still on fire. As I fly around it one last time, I see several Ivans climbing up the turret of the IS to the 13mm anti-aircraft machine gun mounted there. They raise their heads as if on command. I see smoke coming out of the muzzle of their machine gun and realize that they have opened fire on me. I am at a distance of 50, at most 60 meters from them. It is difficult for them to hit me, because the circles I describe have too small a radius, unless they are experienced shooters who have been specially trained to shoot at such targets. I am still reasoning along these lines when 2 hits fall on my airplane, and I feel a searing pain in my left thigh. I struggle to overcome the darkness in front of my eyes and make sure there is warm blood trickling down my leg. I mention the injury to Gatterman, but he can't do anything because he can't reach me. We don't have any bandages. The area we're flying over seems sparsely populated and not particularly suitable for landing. If we land here, it will take God knows how long to get medical attention, and I'll bleed to death. So I must try to reach Budapest, which is a 25-minute flight from us. I feel I'm rapidly losing my strength. The blood is still pouring out. I have a strange feeling, a kind of trance, but I keep flying, and I can still control my feelings. I ask Gatterman, "Do you think I could suddenly lose consciousness, or weaken gradually? You will never fly to Budapest, in all likelihood, but you won't suddenly pass out." He says the last words in addition, in a cursed voice, probably to avoid upsetting me. Then I'll fly onward and try my luck. Maximum throttle. Minutes of anxious tension. I will not give up. I won't. Here comes the airfield with the fighters. Budapest. Release the flaps. Throttle down. I'm landing. That's it. I'm going to the operating table at a private hospital. The nurses are crowded around me, looking at me with curiosity. Behind the surgeon, Professor Fick, stands Gatterman, shaking his head. He tells me later that when I was under anesthesia, I said a few things that in all likelihood failed to delight the nurses. What can be done in such a situation? Professor Fick explains that I was hit by 2 bullets from a 13mm machine gun. One, which he had already extracted, entered at an angle into my thigh, and the other went through and through. He tells me that I have lost a lot of blood, and as soon as he puts a cast on me, I will be sent to a sanatorium on Lake Balaton, so that I can recover faster and let my wounds heal in peace and quiet. Meanwhile, Fridolin has arrived and scolds me for getting into all this because of my curiosity. But although he doesn't tell me directly, he is glad that nothing worse has happened. He reports that we are to relocate to the Stolwesenberg area, and that we will be standing by at Borgund. They secure my stretcher in a sanitary storage and take me to Heves on Lake Balaton, where I am to be treated at Dr. Peter's sanatorium. I have already asked Professor Fick how long my recovery will take and when I will be able to walk at least, let alone fly. He gives an evasive answer, presumably because Gatterman has already told him about my impatient nature. I insist that Dr. Peter remove my bandages immediately and tell me how long he expects me to stay here. He at first refuses to remove the bandages, but then, after much argument, he examines the wound and says, "If there are no complications, you can stay here for 6 weeks." Up until this point, I hadn't been particularly concerned about the wound, but now I feel like I'm losing everything again, doomed to inaction at a time when every person is needed. I'm furious. This is the situation. My leg is in a cast, and I can hardly move around. But of one thing I am firmly convinced. It won't last long. No matter how beneficial the medical care and rest will be to me, I won't be able to rest truly until I get back to the regiment and start flying with it. Fridolin comes down from Borgund every day and visits me with a briefcase full of papers to sign. He keeps me informed of the regiment's battle affairs, of all its anxieties and needs. Between Farmos and our present airfield, the regiment has been temporarily stationed, only for a few days, at the airfield at Vesik, a suburb of Budapest. It is bad November weather, and despite the critical situation, we make only a few combat sorties. On the 8th day, he visits me again and brings me the news that the Soviets are attacking Budapest with large forces and have already captured a bridgehead on this side of the Danube. Worse still, their new offensive from the south toward Balaton threatens to drive a wedge between our positions. He's not at all surprised when I tell him I've had enough of lying in bed and am going to get up and return to the regiment with him. But he doesn't finish that sentence. He knows of my stubbornness. My sister hears Fridolin packing my things and can't believe her eyes when she peeks through the door to see what's going on. When Dr. Peter, who has been warned by her, shows up, he catches me already ready to leave. I know full well that he can't take responsibility, and I don't ask him for anything. He shakes his head watching us leave. An hour later, an automobile takes us to the station. We stand in the village for the time the regiment is stationed at Farmos. The people are very friendly toward us, which is to be expected. They hope that we can stop the Russians and liberate the already occupied part of their country. My orderly Dolman has already prepared for my arrival and heated a room in a small cottage, no doubt believing it will be needed as a hospital room. A few days pass, and the weather improves. I have been flying since day one, having reinforced the leg in the cast with extra straps. Moving around is difficult, but somehow manages. In mid-December, due to heavy rains and wet snow, our flying field becomes more and more like a swamp, and we return to Warpaloda. This airfield is located on dry high ground, and we can take off at any time. My 3rd Squadron has finally been re-equipped with Focke-Wulf 190 fighters, and bearing in mind the current situation, I would not like to give them any special time for retraining. Therefore, 1 or 2 pilots are attached to the regimental headquarters in turn, and between combat sorties, I familiarize them with the new type of aircraft and teach them how to handle it. Each of them makes a few circles, the number of which depends on his flying skill, and then I take them with me as wingmen on combat sorties. After 15 or 20 sorties, their familiarization with the new aircraft is considered complete, and it is the turn of the other crews. As a result, the 3rd Squadron is able to make combat sorties without interruption. During their first combat sorties, the crews have to learn the hardest lessons because the anti-aircraft defenses are strong everywhere, and besides, they are still a little afraid to fly the new type of aircraft, especially because they do not have a gunner to back them up against enemy attacks from behind. During his first combat sortie, Lieutenant Stahler's FV-190 takes a hit in the engine and goes down immediately. He manages to make a forced landing behind our trenches. That day everything goes wrong. Only I am about to take off with Lieutenant M, who is also being trained on a new machine, when a large group of IL-2s, together with a fighter escort, fly past the airfield at an altitude of 600 meters. It is a cold December day, and it takes me some time to warm up the engine so that it runs normally, but in the meantime the Ivans of course disappear over the horizon. It then comes to my attention that during some really cold days, the mechanics have used a warming device that allows us to take off immediately without first warming up the engines. This device depends on specially prepared fuel to work. I make the sign to M to refuel immediately and take off after me. The bomb load for the planned departure is still under the belly of our planes. I do not want to remove the bombs as we have yet to complete our mission. Perhaps even with this cargo we can still catch up with the Ilov formation. M pilots a slow plane and lags behind. I gradually approach the Iron Gustavs, who cross the front line when I am still a few hundred meters away from them. But I am stubborn, and I intend to attack them, even if alone. With my FV-190, I am not afraid of the Russian pilots in their La-5s and Yak-9s. Suddenly, there is a rumble in the engine. Oil is gushing out of it, so that I can't see anything anymore. Oil has splashed all the cockpit windows, and they are losing transparency. In the first moments, I think that the engine was hit by an anti-aircraft shell or a line from a Russian fighter. But then I realize that the engine piston is jammed. The engine pulls badly and makes a terrible rumbling noise. It could stop at any moment. In the second instant, I instinctively lower the nose down and head towards our positions. I should be right above them now. It's impossible to eject with a parachute if I don't even consider the low altitude, because my leg is in a tire. The plane won't be able to go higher even a meter. I drop the lantern to be able to look around and back. I am flying at a height of 50 meters. The terrain below is unsuitable for a forced landing. Besides, I am concerned about getting as close as possible to the airfield, and after landing, without wasting time, to return to my unit. A church steeple is passing me very close. It is good that it was not exactly in my way. Straight ahead, I see a road embankment crossing my course at an angle. Any second, I can expect the engine to stop. I can only hope the airplane passes over the embankment. I pull the handle towards me and wait. Will the car make it over that embankment or not? It did. Here I am touching the ground. With a crunch and scrape, the airplane skids on the frozen ground, parallel to the wide ditch, and stops. It's my leg that worries me most, but it seems to be all right. I look around at the quiet, peaceful winter landscape, only the distant booming of guns reminding me that there is still a war going on, even though Christmas is just around the corner. I unbuckle my harness, cast a glance at the smoking engine, and sit down on the fuselage. A car with 2 soldiers is coming down the road. They look at me carefully first, wanting to make sure I'm not Russian, since those are more likely to fall behind our front lines than we are behind theirs. The soldiers throw the boards across the ditch and carry me to the car. An hour later, I am back on the airfield and preparing for another flight. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. We are quartered in barracks a few kilometers from the airfield, in the suburbs of Warpaloda. The next day, between sorties, as I lie in bed to get some rest, I hear the roar of aircraft engines. They are not German planes. Looking out the open window, I notice a formation of Russian Boston bombers flying at an altitude of 400 meters. They are coming straight at us. The bombs began to fall with a screech. I instantly find myself on the floor. Even with a healthy leg, I could not move faster. A heavy bomb explodes 15 meters in front of the window and blows my BMW to pieces. Dahlman, who at that moment comes through the door to warn me of the raid, finds the window frame around his neck. He succumbs to shock, but is uninjured. At present, thanks to our air support, there is a lull in the Balaton area, but eastward the Soviets have bypassed Budapest and reached the Grand River north of the Danube. South of Budapest, they are tearing from their bridgehead and interacting with units that are moving from the south to the northwest to take the offensive. They are advancing along the eastern slopes of the Vizsla Mountains, north of Stolwesenberg, and Budapest is thus surrounded. We are making combat sorties in that area and farther east. We are trying to hit their communications deep behind the lines in the Hadwan area where Soviet freight trains run. During these rapidly unfolding events, we become experts at everything. We play the role of dive bombers, attack planes, fighters, and reconnaissance planes. The battle to lift the siege of Budapest is in full swing. We are standing at Kemamed in the Papa area. We flight personnel have just arrived from the airfield at Varpaloda, and before we begin to get settled, Fridolin pops his head up and asks, "Did you guys know that Christmas is only 2 days away?" He's right. It is according to the calendar. Takeoff. Combat sortie. Landing. Takeoff. Combat sortie. Landing. We live in this rhythm, day after day. For years, everything else has been swallowed up by this rhythm. Cold and heat, winter and summer, weekdays and weekends. Our lives have become a few ideas and phrases that fill our brains and never leave us, especially now that war has become a struggle for survival. One day follows another. Today it is the same as yesterday. Take off. Where to? Against whom? Encounter with escort. Anti-aircraft fire. These words and thoughts overwhelm both the youngest pilot and the regimental commander. How long will this continue? Will it last forever? So, the day after tomorrow, Christmas, Fridolin together with the staff officer goes to the group headquarters to pick up our Christmas mail. In the meantime, congratulations are pouring in from almost every army unit for the Immelman Wandering Circus. We returned from our last sortie on the very eve of Christmas Eve at 5 o'clock in the evening. Our place is decorated for Christmas, looking cheerful and festive, almost like home. Since we don't have a large room, each squadron celebrates in the largest room of their headquarters. I go around one by one. Each unit celebrates Christmas in a special way that reflects their commander's taste. There's cheer everywhere. I spend most of Christmas with the officers of the regimental headquarters. Our room is decorated with branches of mistletoe and holly, candles burning everywhere. 2 large fir trees and a table in front of them laden with presents reminds us of our childhood. My soldiers' eyes reflect vivid, nostalgic dreams. Their thoughts are with their wives and children at home, with their parents and families, in the past and the future. It is only our subconscious that we see the German military flag among the greenery. It brings us back to reality. We are celebrating Christmas at the front. We sing Silent Night, Holy Night, and other German songs. The husky soldiers' voices weave into a soft consonance. Then a great miracle happens in our hearts. Thoughts of bombs and targets, shells, and anti-aircraft guns are softened by a supernatural sense of peace, a serene and soothing peace, and we think again of sublime and beautiful things with as much simplicity as nuts, punch, and candy. The last echo of favorite German songs is silenced. I say a few words about our German Christmas. I want my men to see me today, among other things, as their comrade, not their commander. We sit together happily for 1 or 2 hours. Then the Christmas evening comes to an end. Streak Peter favors us on the first day of the holidays. There is a thick fog. I know from phone conversations during Christmas that Ivan is attacking, and we are urgently needed, but we can't fly. The next morning I play a short hockey game with my men. That means me with my fur boots on, standing in the goal, because 5 weeks after my injury I can only waddle. I can't skate yet. In the afternoon, our hosts, with whom we are quartered, invite me and a few other officers to go hunting. I know very little about regular or garden hunting on the ground. We have many riflemen in our detachment, but only a few corals. The hares seem to know that fate is on their side this time, and once in the cauldron, do not hesitate to leap lightning fast through the wide gaps between us. Walking through the deep snow is not at all conducive to my quick recovery. My driver, Corporal Baum, is standing at the side. Suddenly I see some magnificent specimen leave cover and rush toward us. I turn around like a born hunter, close my left eye, and bang! I pull the trigger. Someone's body falls, but not a hare, but Boom, whom I, gripped, like all newcomers by hunting enthusiasm, did not notice at all. Apparently he still doubts my intentions, for he looks at me lying in the snow and says reproachfully, "Why, Herr Oberst?" He noticed in time that I was aiming and threw himself to the ground just before the shot was fired. The shot missed him, but the hare was unharmed. I am even more frightened than both of my intended victims. Now that could have been a real Christmas surprise. Yet another confirmation of the favorite saying of all dive pilots, nothing works itself out if you don't practice. The next morning the weather is setting up nicely. Ivan is already on his feet. He makes a raid on our airfield. Once again their bombing is deplorably bad. It's just a disgrace. Their low-altitude attacks pass at over 400 meters. We take little or no damage. For the entire second day after Christmas, we are flying combat sorties to help the ground forces to the northeast, on the Grand River, and all the rest of the Budapest front. Our peaceful Christmas mood has been dispelled. Ruthless war surrounds us again. The quiet, joyous peace of Christmas evening has receded into the purgatory of yesterday. Furious battles rage in the air and on the ground. On our side, fresh reinforcements have been brought into the fight. These are my old acquaintances, friends from the Eastern Front, tankers who, like us, are playing the role of the High Command's fire department. Our common task is to help those units that are encircled in Budapest to get through, to open a corridor for them to withdraw and join the rest of the forces. Together we can pull these chestnuts out of the fire. Year after year, day after day, I have fought in all sectors of the Eastern Front. I believe I have gained considerable knowledge of military tactics. Experience teaches that only practice leads to perfection. Practical knowledge is the only criterion of what is possible and impossible, good or bad. Flying sorties every day, We must know carefully every ditch, every fold of ground below, because we are constantly flying at low altitude. Confusion reigns on the ground. Some of our armored units are broken up, and the panzer grenadiers are thrown into battle as regular infantrymen. The tanks who have always worked together with them in the same team feel insecure. The infantry assigned to them have no practical experience of fighting together, and this may end in dangerous surprises. I cannot understand how such an order could have been given. Moreover, it is difficult to imagine a worse choice than the sector chosen for this offensive, which is full of swamps and other obstacles, when there are so many more favorable alternatives. The infantry, on the other hand, must advance over flat, open terrain, which is ideal for tanks but has too little cover. The enemy takes full advantage, and so our infantry confronts the Soviet steel monsters, left unsupported by tanks. Why these wasted losses? The perpetrators must be brought to justice. Who gave these orders? We sit together in the evening and ponder these questions. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. On December 30, I receive a radiogram that I must immediately arrive in Berlin and report to the Reichsmarschall. I am boiling with anger, because it seems to me that my presence is indispensable during these difficult operations. I leave for Berlin the same day, follow through Vienna, and am determined to return to my comrades in 2 or 3 days. Orders are orders. The only luggage I take with me is a large dispatch briefcase with a change of linen and toiletries. In view of the gravity of the situation, I reject the possibility of staying in Berlin for long. On the way, I have the uneasy feeling that I am being summoned for some unpleasant reason. When I was last wounded in November, I received an order forbidding me to fly, in spite of which I resumed flying as soon as I left the hospital. Today, no one has brought it up, and I have gradually begun to interpret this silence as acquiescence. But now, as I suppose, the matter has come up again, and I am being called on the carpet. I fly to Berlin with great reluctance, knowing that I will never obey this order. I cannot simply gaze merrily around, advise or give orders at a time when my country is in danger, especially when my vast experience gives me an advantage over those who have not received sufficient training. Success is the fruit of experience and is commensurate with it. Although I have been wounded 5 times, several of them seriously, I have been fortunate in that I have always recovered quickly and have been able to pilot an airplane again and again, day after day, year after year, all along the Eastern Front, from the White Sea to Moscow, from Astrakhan to the Caucasus. I know the Russian front inside and out. Therefore, I feel an incessant duty to keep flying and fighting until the guns are silenced and the freedom of our country is secured. I can do this because I am physically healthy and trained by sports, my good form being one of the most valuable sources of my strength. After a short stop at friends in Vienna, I land in Berlin and immediately report by telephone to Kurland. I would prefer to go there immediately so that I can fly back without wasting time. To my embarrassment, I am ordered to stay in Fürstenhof and apply to the Luftwaffe Ministry for a pass for the Reichsmarschall's special train that is going west. My trip will be longer than I expected. My summons seems to have nothing to do with imposing punishment. The next evening we head west from the Grunwald station. This means that I will meet the new year on this train. I strive not to think of my unit. As soon as I start thinking about them, everything goes black in front of my eyes. What will 1945 bring us? We arrive in the Frankfurt area early on the morning of January 1. I hear the roar of planes and peer into the gray pre-dawn haze. An armada of fighter planes flying at low altitude passes close to the railroad car. My first thought is, the Americans. It's been forever since I've seen so many of our airplanes in the sky at the same time. But it's just unbelievable. They all have German swastikas on them, and they are single fighter planes, Me-109s or Fe-190s. They're heading west. I'll have to find out about their mission later. Here the train stops. It seems to me that we are somewhere near Nauheim-Friedberg. An automobile is already waiting for me, and after passing through the forest, we arrive at a building that resembles an ancient castle. Here I am greeted by an adjutant of the Reichsmarschall. He tells me that Göring has not yet arrived, and I will have to wait for him. He doesn't know why I've been summoned. I have no choice but to click my heels and stay here at the Luftwaffe's western headquarters. I'm going for a 2-hour walk. What wonderful air there is in this hilly and forested area. I fill my lungs with pleasure. Why have I been summoned here? I'm due back in 3 hours, when the Reichsmarschall is expected to arrive. I hope he won't keep me waiting long and will receive me. But when I return, he's not here yet. Beside me has arrived a general, my old comrade still on training flights on Stukas in the area of Graz. He tells me about today's operation, for the planning and execution of which he is primarily responsible. There are constant reports of large-scale attacks on airfields in Belgium and northern France. The planes you saw this morning were taking part in a low-altitude attack on Allied air bases. We hope to be able to destroy so many aircraft there that enemy air superiority over the area of our halted offensive operation in the Ardennes will be neutralized. I tell the general that such a thing would have been impossible on the Eastern Front because the distance to be flown over enemy territory was too great, and flying at low altitude would mean huge losses from very strong air defenses. Could it have been different in the West? It seems unlikely. If the Americans succeed in such attacks over Germany, it is only because our airfields are insufficiently defended for the simple reason that we cannot spare enough men and military equipment for this purpose. He tells me that today all formations had maps with plotted routes of approach to enemy airfields. In the East, we have long since not developed practical actions based on theory, and do exactly the opposite. The commander of an air unit receives only the most general assignment, and how he will fulfill it is entirely his business, because he is fully responsible for it. Now the war in the air has become so diverse that no one can no longer rely on theories. Only commanders have the necessary experience, and at a critical moment, they are more likely to make the right decision. It is very good that in the East we realize this in time. Otherwise, it is quite clear that none of us would no longer be able to fly. So the enemy 500 airplanes on the ground more or less is not so important as long as the crews remain alive. It would be far better to use these fighters, which have been piling up for raids for so long, over our own front and clear the airspace there. If we could eliminate for a time the nightmare of the Allies' vast air superiority, we could give our comrades on the ground a good chance to feel the wind in their sails again. Any movement of troops and supplies behind the front lines could take place unimpeded. Any enemy planes that we might have destroyed would have been a true loss in most cases, because along with the planes their crews would have perished. All these thoughts cross my mind. A few hours later, the final results of the operation confirm my fears. 500 enemy aircraft were destroyed on the ground, did not return 220 of our planes with their crews. Among the dead, veterans, commanders of compounds, old men, who are already few. All this saddens me. Today, the operation will be reported to the Reichsmarschall and Supreme Commander-in-Chief as a great victory. What is this? Deliberate misrepresentation or inflated personal ambition? The adjutant comes in and says to me, "Oberst von Below just called. He would like you to come in for a cup of coffee." But can't I report to the Reichsmarschall personally? The Reichsmarschall hasn't arrived yet. Why don't you visit von Below yet? I ponder for a while whether I need to change my clothes, but decide not to, in order to save my last shirt for my conversation with the Reichsmarschall. A relatively long trek through the forest brings us to a town made up of barracks and rural dwellings. This is the Fuhrer's headquarters in the west. Over coffee, I tell von Below about the latest developments on the Russian front. After 20 minutes, he leaves me, but immediately returns and briefly asks me to follow him. Without suspecting anything, I pass through several rooms. Then he opens the door, lets me through, and I find myself face to face with the Fuhrer. All I can think about is that I didn't put on a clean shirt. Nothing else comes to mind. I recognize the other men standing around him. The Reichsmarschall, who is beaming with pleasure, which happens very rarely, Admiral Dönitz, Field Marshal Keidel, Chief of the General Staff Lieutenant General Duel, and a number of other famous military men, including generals from the Eastern Front. They all surround a huge-sized table with a map showing the situation on the fronts. They look at me, and those looks make me nervous. The Fuehrer notices my embarrassment and addresses me in complete silence. He gives me his hand and extols my latest operation. He says that in recognition of my bravery, he is awarding me the highest award for bravery, the Golden Oak Leaves with swords and diamonds to the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross, and conferring on me the rank of Oberst. I listen to his words in amazement, but when he speaks with emphasis, "Enough flying. Your life must be preserved for the good of the German youth and your experience," I am instantly alarmed. This means that I will have to stay on the ground. Farewell, my battle comrades. My Fuehrer, I cannot accept this award and promotion if I am no longer allowed to fly with my unit. My right hand is still in his hand. He is still gazing into my eyes. With his left hand, he hands me the black, corduroy-clad case containing my new award. The many lamps in the room make the diamonds sparkle with all the colors of the rainbow. He looks at me with sadness. Then his expression changes, and he says, "Okay, keep flying," and smiles. At that moment, a warm wave of joy covers my heart, and I am happy. Later, von Beloff tells me that he and the generals almost had a stroke when I put my terms. He assures me that the lightning that slipped across the face of the Fuehrer not always turns into a smile. Everyone congratulates me. The commander-in-chief of the Luftwaffe, with particular cordiality, he pinches my hand hard just out of pleasure. Admiral Donitz's congratulations are more moderate as he adds somewhat irritably, "I regard your request to continue flying," addressed to the Fuehrer, "as not in keeping with the duty of a soldier. I have many good submarine captains, but sooner or later they all had to obey orders. Good thing he's not my commander-in-chief." The Fuehrer leads me to a table with maps and tells me that the meeting has just discussed the situation in the Budapest area. I just came from there, right? He lists the reasons reported to him for the not entirely satisfactory progress of the operation, which has not yet resulted in a corridor for communication with the besieged city. I infer that weather, transportation, and other difficulties were cited as explanations, but never once mentioned the mistakes we witnessed ourselves while in the air, a separation of armored divisions, and the choice of unsuitable terrain for attacking tanks and infantry. I report my opinion based on long experience of the war on the Eastern Front and on the fact that during this operation I flew in this sector for 8 hours daily, mostly at low altitude. Everyone listens to me in silence. After a short pause, the Fuehrer makes a remark, circling the circle of his advisors with his eyes. "You see how I have been missiled, and who knows for how long." He does not rebuke anyone personally, although he knows the true circumstances, but it is obvious that he resents the deception. Pointing across the map, he expresses his desire to regroup our forces for a new attempt to lift the siege of Budapest. He asks me where, from my point of view, the terrain is most conducive to an attack by armored units. I give my opinion. Later, this operation is completed successfully. The strike group approached the defensive lines of the defenders of Budapest, and those were able to break out of the city. When the meeting ends, the Fuehrer leads me into his private office, furnished with great taste and utilitarian simplicity. I wish my comrades could have been here and lived with me all these hours, for I am here only because of their accomplishments. The Fuehrer offers me a drink, and we talk about many things. He asks me about my wife, my son, my parents, and my sisters. After asking me in great detail about my personal affairs, he begins to talk about his ideas relating to rearmament. Quite naturally, he starts with the Luftwaffe, putting the main emphasis on the supposed modernization of the planes we use. He asks me if I think it is justified to continue flying the slow U-87s now that enemy fighters are flying at 400 kilometers per hour faster. Referring to some drawings and calculations, he points out that retractable landing gear can increase the speed of the U-87 by at most 50 kilometers per hour. On the other hand, Its performance during dive would change in a most unfavorable way. He asks my opinion on every point. He discusses the smallest details of ballistics, physics, and chemistry with an ease that impresses me greatly. He also tells me of his desire to begin experiments to test the feasibility of mounting 4 30cm cannons in the wings instead of the present 2 37mm cannons. He believes that the aerodynamic qualities of our anti-tank airplane would be greatly improved by this change. The same tungsten core projectiles would be used as ammunition, and as a result the efficiency of airplanes equipped with such weapons would surely increase. After explaining to me the far-reaching improvements in other fields such as artillery, small arms, and submarines, all with the same startling familiarity, he tells me that he has personally written the preliminary text of the grounds for my latest award. We chat for about an hour and a half when the resident reports that the movie is ready to be shown. Every new weekly news item is immediately shown to the Fuehrer, who authorizes its showing throughout Germany. It so happened we had gone down only one flight and were already sitting in the auditorium. That the picture began with a scene shot on the airfield while our regiment was stationed in Stolwesenberg, followed by a scene of Stukas taking off and a panorama of tanks I had shot down west of Budapest. After the showing of the movie, I left the Supreme Commander. Oberst von Below handed me the certificates of award of the Knight's Cross with oak leaves, swords, and diamonds, which were kept in the Reich Chancellery. Each of them weighed over a kilogram, especially the last two, housed in massive gold frames which, their sentimental value aside, must have cost a hefty sum. I went to Göring's headquarters. The Reichsmarshal expressed his pleasure, which was the greater because recent events had made his position very difficult. The superiority of the enemy in the air had increased all our troubles and hampered our plans, but how could it be done away with? He is immensely cheerful and proud that at this moment one of his men has inspired the Fuehrer to create a new German award for bravery. Taking me a little aside, he says to me playfully, "Do you see how envious everyone is of me and how happy they are at the deterioration of my position?" At the meeting, the Fuehrer said that he was creating a new and unique award for you because your achievements were incomparable, while representatives of other branches of the army objected that the awardee was a Luftwaffe soldier whose shortcomings were the cause of so many problems. They wanted to know, was it not possible, at least theoretically, to earn the award to soldiers of other branches of the army as well? You see now what I have to confront. He says that he would never have believed that I could persuade the Fuehrer to change his mind about banning my flights. Now that I have his authorization, he cannot himself forbid me to fly. He is asking me, as he has done many times before, to accept the post of commander of the entire frontline aviation. But considering how I have secured the Fuhrer's approval to fly, I don't think he seriously believes he can convince me to do so, at least not today. After lunch, I board a special train bound for Berlin, where my plane is waiting to take me to my comrades at the front. I spend only a few hours in Berlin, but it is enough to attract a whole crowd of curious people, since the story of my award has already been reported by the press and on the radio. In the evening, I meet with Ritter von Hult, then chief of the German sport organization. He tells me how, after many attempts, he was able to convince Hitler that I should lead the Reich's sports movement after the war. When my war memoirs are written and I hand over my current post to my successor, I will be offered this appointment. On my way to the front, I fly into Görlitz to meet my family, then take to the air again and set course for Budapest on the same day that reports of the situation on that section of the front become particularly grim. During my landing, the regiment is assembled so that the deputy squadron commander can congratulate me on behalf of the entire unit on my new award and rank. We then take to the air again and make a combat sortie to the Budapest area. If the Russian anti-aircraft gunners only knew how much gold and diamonds were flying over their heads, says one Gram staff mechanic with a smirk, you can bet they'd shoot a lot better and put in more effort.